Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I presented earlier, and I thought that the worst position was to present before the lunch, but I was wrong. The worst position is to present before the drinks. So we're going to try to stick to the time, and this is a session for you guys. So if any time there is a question that you would prefer to be answered by the panel, please raise the hand and be as collaborative as you can. So first, I'm going to start with introductions for amazing panel. Aymeric, please.
Yeah, working. Hi, my name is Aymeric. I'm head of data science at Nationwide, a big retail bank in the UK. Actually, we are not a bank officially because we are not owned by private people, but by our members. But we do exactly everything just like a bank. We are the, I think, second biggest mortgage lender, so we are quite big on mortgages. That's our business. But we do front account, savings, everything else, really.
You are second after Santander?
No, after Halifax, I think. Okay. Or Halifax, yeah, is the biggest.
Competition.
Yeah. Sorry, John?
Hi, I'm John Ashley. I'm the General Manager for Financial Services and Technology at NVIDIA. You may know us as a gaming company. You may know us as the most valuable silicon company on the planet. But in this context, we provide mostly AI and risk calculation platforms. So from the hardware on up through the full stack of software tools to enable all your AI, ML, and sort of high-performance computing needs.
Thank you. Leon?
Yeah, hi. Leon Saunders Calvert. I look after the desktop business for the institutional investment community at the London Stock Exchange Group. London Stock Exchange Group is, of course, really well known for the actual stock exchange and the venues itself, but the vast majority of the revenue is in the data and analytics business, and it's in that business that I sit. So for those of you that have come across Icon or Refinitiv Workspace, the equivalent of sort of the Bloomberg terminal, if you like, I hate to say that, but I run that for the institutional investment community, sell-side research, buy-side research, portfolio management. I guess I'll say one more thing whilst I've got the mic, which is my esteemed panelists here. I don't think any of us were intending to be on an all-male panel here, so apologies to all of you. There was another person, but she came down with COVID, so that's a shame. But nevertheless, we'll do our best to represent.
Yeah. No, very good point. We tried every time that we have a panel to don't be all males or all females. Unfortunately, this time we failed. So if you wish, it's kind of data science, technology, research-ish. So the first question I have is, obviously, we're facing in the data science, analytics space, a war for talent. It's very difficult to retain and very difficult to recruit talent. You have to invest in people, you have to train them, you have to coach them, you have to motivate them. So how do you as a bank, Leon, well, as a bank, Aymeric, or as an investment company, Leon, deal with that?
Sure. Would you like me to go first? Look, a couple of thoughts. The most obvious, we have a data science team in the data analytics division of the London Stock Exchange Group, and we call them LSEG labs. And there is that is where we most obviously see that war for talent. We, of course, have innovation teams across the various different business lines and things, but it's in that LSEG Labs hub where you see that challenge. I think there is a challenge in the industry broadly, but we certainly feel it, which is productizing and getting to market some of the innovation is not necessarily easy. And that means that you have motivational challenges with team members who frankly don't just want to play in the sandbox. They want to see the outcomes of their work being deployed into production and commercialized. And the process of getting something from sandbox to productization is not necessarily entirely straightforward. I think that's probably not just a problem with us. I think that we're not on our own on that. But I can see that affects the motivation of the team. And of course, at that point, then you start to look for other areas where you think, oh, well, maybe the grass is greener over here, and they've got a better way about figuring out how to get this stuff from innovation and sandbox into production. But I think that's very, very meaningful. Often that's what I hear from that labs team. I think the other thing is that there tends to be a little bit of a focus around particular data science or or ML professionals. And actually what you really need, I think a good example of what I just said about getting things to production, is you need to create teams which are really effective, that have soft skills across the sort of data science process, but also, quite frankly, that know how to do data scrubbing and data sourcing, data scrubbing, stitching data together to make it workable for the purposes of ML purposes, and good governance people that can figure out how to create governance models within those teams, and people, quite frankly, who can interact with the businesses and sell the value to the different business heads about what they're doing. Those sort of soft skills, those communication skills, are critically important to be able to kind of make that leap, make that progress, make that process work. And so there's actually quite a wide sort of array of talent that you need in order to make this work really, really well. It's not just retaining and holding on to and finding the people that know how to code the best, if you see what I mean. And sometimes we're a little bit too narrowly focused on the talent pool that's required. But I think that motivational issue of making sure you can actually figure out how you take things from sandbox to production is probably the biggest single thing.
I completely agree. Aymeric?
Yeah, I agree. That could be a frustration unless you accept that's part of your job. The problem is many young people don't want to see that, and they like the math, they like the computers, that's funny, that's shiny and all of that. But the truth is, part of your job is to navigate through all these troubles to actually create something eventually. And unless you maybe at Google or Amazon who have all these nice tech in place, in 95% of companies, it will be hard to get data pipelines, to even source the data, to produce value out of it. So really, we must be really clear that when you hire someone, it's not very shiny. You will have trouble doing things, but if you're serious about being a data scientist, if it's your passion, then that's part of your job, and you will manage it. It's just another part of your work. So that's one point, definitely. The data science market is a little bit funny because you've got so many applicants and so many jobs and so much demand that it's a bit everywhere at the same time. It's a little bit all over the place. So to find someone who is really skilled on the right type of skills, who has soft skills, as you said, and can deliver things, it's very, very niche, and you will struggle to find them. But when you do find them, you have to pay for them, and that's the sad truth, that job is a market. So, if you don't offer the money, they will go somewhere else. It's really hard to make the HR and finance people to understand that, but that's the truth. So if you pay data scientists as you would pay any software engineer, then you will lose them, and that's sad, but that's true. So it's just a fact.
And also career progression. I mean, a data scientist, the increase the value on the market per year is roughly around 20%, which means that you cannot have the standard career plan that you have for the rest of the organization. You need to accommodate data scientists for that type of career.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things we see across our customer base, partly that frustration of, hey, I want to get stuff in production. Partly it's, if you're going to hire tool jockeys, you can hire, right? People that have whatever the tool is you want on their resume, you can hire those. It's those people with the soft skills and the business skills. They're hard to hire, and they're willing to navigate some stuff, but there's a point where they say, no, enough's enough. I don't have enough compute. I can't actually train a model in any reasonable amount of time. I don't have access to the data. There's too many silos. I think we need to think about those kind of problems and sort of making sure that they've got the environment and the tools. And part of that is not just for development, but all the way into production. Without that, those really good, skilled people that you talked about and that you're saying you have to pay, they're not going to stay. They're going to come work for Google or Amazon.
And this is not people. It's also process and technology. It's all combined together. Completely agree with all of you. Moving to the next topic, and this is more for you, John. What obstacles do you predict in achieving digital transformation, and how they can be prevented?
So I think,
It's for me or
for John?
For John. Go ahead.
I think, right, a lot of people think, digital transformation, that means I just have to get an app onto a phone, right? Or I have to get make processes automated. And I think there's a lot of things we do as humans, as people, where we need a person in the loop. I think there's a lot of opportunity to augment our staff using AI rather than trying to automate them out. I think the goal, I think one of the speakers earlier was saying the goal of replacing a human with a perfect automation machine when we live in an imperfect world isn't going to happen. That human in the loop mitigation, having a person involved, is key. And I think digital transformation, we need to recognize that. We need to set realistic goals. And then we need to be really smart about where we deploy AI. And sometimes we shouldn't be deploying AI. We should be deploying machine learning. Sometimes it's just a rule. A simple rule gets 90% of the value. Call it good. Put a person in the loop to handle the other 10%. We just need to make those business calls better.
Any views, Aymeric?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned this. The speaker earlier was saying humans are underrated. And I would say often, but very often they are overrated. The problem is they don't know when they are over or under. So you've got so many tasks that could be automated, and then people don't, they grab onto it, they want to keep that their job. At the same time, other tasks that are very human-specific, they are not really willing to do them. So for me, at the even senior exec stage, anything which is about forecasting, optimizing things, and all of that can be automated. The human needs to say, what's the strategy? What's my business problem? What do I want to achieve? Where do I want to go? The AI can do nothing about that. So there must be a boundary that needs to be redefined to what needs to be done by human, what needs to be done by computers. And I think it's a question that's far from being solved, because that really requires maybe 100 years of business practices to be totally redesigned. Like pricing, there's probably no point to do pricing for nothing. Now you just dynamic pricing. Amazon, Google can do that. It's fair. It's just an optimization problem. The business vision strategy, that's a very human thing, and that's what we need. So we need to redefine who does what, and make sure it's all optimized and efficient.
Absolutely. There are strategic concepts that a machine is not going to incorporate. You have to make the predictions, and a human with all these different concepts have to make the decision. Any views, Leon?
Yeah, a couple of other thoughts. So actually, first of all, just backing up what these gentlemen have said, I wrote a little note for myself saying that over-promise of AI. You've got to be clear about what AI can do and what it can't do, and the difference between artificial intelligence and human intelligence, which I would largely define as humans are essentially hypothesis-generating machines. That's what they do. Whereas AI is much more, I don't want to oversimplify it, but is pattern recognition in a sort of profound way. And you can create all kinds of pattern recognition, which are incredibly useful through AI, which humans wouldn't be able to recognize because they can't crunch that amount of data. But it's a different thing, and you've got to figure out where the two are useful. The other thing I would say is cultural inertia in financial services. I used to run the investment banking business, which is the business that services the M&A bankers and capital raising bankers in investment banks. And a lot of the work that the junior staff do there, which has sort of been the case for many decades, is they work all hours of the day, 7 days a week. And the senior bankers sort of just take advantage of them, and it's kind of the rites of passage you have to go through. There's enormous amounts of opportunity for digitalizing that workflow experience, particularly the pitch book creation, the financial model creation, the pitch book creation workflow experience that the junior bankers do. Senior bankers don't want that to happen. That sounds rather odd, but they are wedded to the process that they currently work with, which is where they get to kind of point the finger at the junior banker and say, right, you have to finish off this model and work that through until 2 in the morning or whatever it is, right? They're not open necessarily to that digital experience. The culture inertia, which is very embedded in organizations, has to be overcome and should not be underestimated. There's a final point that I make, which I don't think is very important yet, but which is there's a potential challenge for this sense of inherent bias and things that AI produces or can produce. And so it almost feels to me as if is there a down the stream reputational challenge that people are kind of worried that the fact they don't want to kind of end up in those information bubbles, which which AI creates. I don't think that's a big problem yet. I think that's more a problem in sort of social media and things. But to the degree that, in the financial services world, that starts to become more of a problem, you may have to overcome and figure out the messaging and narrative to overcome the resistance to that. But probably relatively small fry versus some of the other problems for the time being.
Yeah, I agree. There was a speaker from the Bank of England this morning, and I asked a question about AI ethics, explainability, all those kind of, and he politely avoided. But I really like how he approached it. I'm not representing the BOE, I can tell you what I think. Okay, we have been talking about how to implement it, technology issues, but what about the customer? What is the impact on the customer from the AI point of view? So on a private customer or wealth customer, what do you think, Aymeric? I know that you mainly sell mortgages, but on that type of customer, what is the impact of AI?
Well, everywhere, because really, I see AI being everywhere in any area of the business. So the most obvious one, which is the point of contact, and that's anything like chatbots or automatic services. That's the number one client. It's not so easy to achieve, but will go somewhere. And then you've got all the back end about the pricing, what else? The management of money, the services. So really, I think banking is all about services, really, nothing else. And services are the best use case for AI anyway. So for me, it's just everywhere, in short.
Yeah. Any views from anyone? John?
I think what we see is, right, there's this customer experience. And AI, it pulls patterns out, right? It repeats those patterns. AI can give you a very consistent 24/7 customer experience for 80 or 90% of what your customers need. And then as they move through their journey, right, as their needs become more complex, as they move from needing a relatively simple mortgage to maybe a more complicated product, or as they move from being a banking customer to a wealth management customer, or they move from an SME kind of corporate account to having some more special needs, I think we're going to have to figure out how to do that handoff from the automated system to the human world, right? To where that human level of contact, that extra bit of service, that knowledge to deal with the complexity matters. But I think most of the time, for most people, AI is going to bring more consistent, easier access, cheaper support that isn't grumpy because their kid barfed on their shoulder, that morning, or they, slipped on ice in the driveway, right? It's going to be very reliable and consistent.
Yeah, I agree. One of the best experiences I had in banking, and I shouldn't say this because I work in a bank that is not a challenger bank, but in a competition, in a challenger bank, I was on the other part of the world, I don't remember where it was, in Thailand, and I was taking cash from a cash machine. The cash got stuck, and I just put it on the chatbot. My money was there, got stuck, and they got removed from my bank account. And they told me, in minutes, do not worry, the money has been put back, no issues, please, sorry for the disturbance. It was the best banking feedback I got, the best service, and that would have been impossible 5-10 years ago, and impossible with AI. And that is all thanks to these kind of services. Do you see any other big advantages from the AI point of view on the retail customer, on the end customer?
I think one of the other pieces is just around things like when you start looking at how people are going to want to invest differently, right? As individual investors come out, as we see the rise of the retail investor, as we see ESG investing becoming a big deal, understanding, really hyper-personalizing your investment portfolio, looking upstream at the news to understand, is this company, does it fit my screening criteria? Looking at the market to see, hey, does it fit my risk profile? Should I be holding this? Should I be thinking about selling this now? Having those agents, having those components everywhere. Apologies for that. I thought it was on silent. Having all that in place, I think, is something that AI is promising and is close to being able to start delivering on.
I completely agree. I was just going to say my main note on obviously my customers are not the end consumer or retail investor, but the democratization of the investment process, I think, is certainly enabled by the application of AI. I think it makes it much easier to be a retail investor and to kind of, do more than just have fun and play, if you see what I mean, and be quite meaningful. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. Let's move on. Move to what does the future look like for AI? So, what is going to happen in 2 years, in 4 years? What do you see? Any trends for the future of AI?
Big one. As far as what I see and what I try to push as well is, so up to now, the adoption for AI was very often about tell me things, give me information about my customers and all of that. Then, as a human, I will do something about it. Whereas more and more we will see integration between business and AI. So I don't want even to know. I just want the AI to manage things and take decisions. So the AI taking actions by itself. So removing the human in the loop sometimes, not all the time. This is really where the full potential will appear. Because if you keep, if you restrain it and say, just tell me things and I'll do something about it as a human, you kind of, you cut the process halfway. So,
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, a few thoughts. If you take sort of some of the broad themes around which sort of AI is now being deployed towards, NLP has entirely gone mainstream now, but that doesn't mean that there aren't more and more use cases to which you can deploy NLP capabilities. So, one of the things that we've spent a lot of time on recently is sort of sentiment analysis to allow you to crunch enormous amounts of or create metadata out of enormous amounts of textual data across filings and research reports and news and event transcripts and so on and so forth. Speech recognition, so to turn things like events into transcripts without human capital that's required to do that today. Correlations. Everyone's been talking about alt data, alternative data, for years, but actually it's incredibly hard to work with alternative data in the context of investment practices, primarily because you need to do enormous amounts of stitching of the data to what you might describe as fundamental data or core data, to stitch back to entities and things like that to make sense of it. But actually just with sort of visual correlations, you can start to make very, very good use out of AI to see where there are correlations, which may be spurious, but they may not be, between alt data and fundamental performance data. I see that as being really useful. I've seen a couple of fintechs in the market doing a great job of that. And then finally, image analysis. As that becomes more mature, the ability to deploy image analysis to, one of the other major topics which you just highlighted, the ESG space, particularly the climate space, as you think about image analysis of satellite imagery and things like that, both looking for emissions and being able to associate those emissions to the emitting companies, but also looking at physical risks associated with expected worsening drought, worsening flooding as a result of climate change. All of that kind of image analysis, which you can deploy to more and more and is maturing, that is ripe for being made part of the investment process, particularly long-term investment practices. So I think those are some of the areas that at least we sort of are looking at.
Yeah.
I think on the capital market side, I agree with everything you've said. I think as you move into the more retail space, I think one of the things we're going to see a lot more attention paid to, and it's been a theme of a couple of the talks here, is this whole concept of trustworthy and explainable AI, right? And we have this problem with models today. The problem isn't new. The problem is that AI gets it more focus, it makes it more newsworthy, and it lets us automate things we couldn't automate before, which means the problem appears in places it didn't before. But I think there's going to be a lot of focus on that. The other thing is recommendation engines, right? How do everything we do with a retail customer is in many cases What should you do next? What should you invest next? What should you borrow next? What credit card should you take? How should you spend your loyalty points? What should I send you to make you stay sticky, because customer churn is a pain, right? It's very expensive to acquire a new customer. Can we keep a customer cheaper? I think this recommendation engine that, right now is the preserve of the hyperscalers and the Netflixes of the world, is going to be part of that democratization. We're going to build the tools that let us do it with thinner data sets, with smaller pools of stuff, but still do it well and fairly. And I think that's going to be a big driver of change in the consumer side, along with all those changes we talked about in the investment side.
Yeah, I completely agree. Before I move to any questions, any more questions, does anyone in the audience have any questions? Yeah. Ellie, I can make it, no worries.
Just interested to get your thoughts on, given how long you've been in the industry, I'm quite interested to get your thoughts on terms of liability of ethical frameworks, and do you see it more as like your individual company should step up to take the responsibility, or do you see it more as a collaborative thing, or do you see it more as a, like, you guys stand back, wait for the world to develop a framework, and then you guys will build on that? Interested in your individual thoughts on that.
Great question.
I'm happy to go first. I think the answer is we see it as all of those, but we're certainly not waiting on sort of some external godlike figure to come down and define that for us. So there is an expectation that there will be maturing of both regulation, but also expectation and industry best practice and that kind of thing, which we need to be very, very plugged into and influence. But in order to influence it, then we've got to be clear about what we think that means for us internally ourselves anyway. So we're absolutely, it's a major part of for instance, that, the labs team that I referred to earlier, which is where kind of a lot of the core heavy lifting takes place. It's a major component of the governance and ethical issues associated with how the team runs itself is a major component part of the internal value proposition. And I don't mean to imply that I think that we've kind of fully mature in that space, but certainly it's highly active. And the expectation is that that team is also engaging with what does best practice look like in the rest of the industry and with peers and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think that's one of the examples where humans should do their homework. Because as a technician, we can do algorithms, we can do whatever we want, that's fine. A question that no one wants to answer is what means fair? So they say, we want fair AI, fair outcome. Define fair precisely in a very, write a book about what's exactly fairness. What is one use case of fair and that's unfair. And when you have that, we can work on how the AI can respect those principles and how we can demonstrate our decisions, respect all of that. But very often it's very vague. So how do you, as a human, like no machine can answer this question. We must define, as a society maybe, what is fair. So I'll give you an example. Maybe many people think it's unfair to make, people who live in different areas pay more for their insurance. That's, if you say things like this, that's unfair. But when you think about it, insurances basically sell risk. So if you're in a more riskier area, as a customer, you have more risk. So the insurance is selling you more risk, so their price should be accordingly. So what do? Do we say it's fair, so the insurance gives the same price to everyone, even if you're in a very safe place or very risky place where it's almost sure your car will burn? So define that first, and then we can discuss how we make the AI prove they do the right thing.
I think, today we have models and we automate stuff. And so I think there's a piece of our model governance and our business that's already doing that. I think, again, AI lets us bring those tools, models, automation, more places, thinking about not only what's fair, but what does failure look like, right? If this model goes off the rails, right? Certain rules-based models, the boundary conditions are easier to understand. I think this trustworthy AI thing comes back to that. I also think we're going to see new business models. We're going to see people offering to evaluate your AI systems, both the model itself, the data set you have, the governance you have for, oh yeah, we evaluated it, we've given you a check, and this is going to go into feed into your ESG score, right? Your AI model governance is going to feed to that. And then somewhere there's going to be an insurer or a reinsurer that wants to sell you insurance for your model. They're going to come in and evaluate it, and you'll be able to buy insurance because that's what insurance companies do. So I think there's all sorts of interesting things that are going to happen in that space, but anyone that's waiting for it to happen to them deserves what they're going to get.
And it can be a competitive advantage, I think, is the point that you're making, right? You can turn really good, effective model governance into a competitive advantage for yourself, right? And even into a business model, to your point. I think that's exactly right.
No, I agree. There is no regulation yet, but what is clear is you shouldn't be not doing anything. It's not an option anymore. You need to have some kind of structure, guidelines, or whatever it is, but something is coming soon, and you need to react. Any other questions?
Anything for you? Sure, thanks. Thank you guys for sharing the insights. So I'm a data scientist, and a lot of data science projects is dealing with like operational efficiency, how to increase that. And I do found there's kind of an inherent like conflict between data scientists and operational team, because they will tell us, hey, we only have this kind of capacity, but we want to, but we from like data scientist point of view be like, can you guys investigate a little bit more, give more labels to the data so we can have more usable data? And during this conflict, this battle, I kind of feel like we always failed. It's like they always win for whatever reason. And we have to use, we do have like a lot of methodology we can deal with that kind of situation, but I kind of feel that problem is still there. Like, I want to know if you guys have any view in terms of this particular challenge. I think it could be a very common challenge, but I see that very often in data science area. And is there any suggestions, solutions you guys can offer or something like that? Thanks.
So I think this goes back to one of the points that I made earlier, which is to create competitive advantage around how you deploy AI in the organization is not just how good your data scientists are. It's creating a culture in the organization which understands that model creation is an iterative process, that by definition it involves failure, that success involves not just creating a really good model, but figuring out how to productizing it and build the operations around it and the inputs into it, the appropriate level of data, the appropriate stitching of data, the appropriate quality of data, et cetera, et cetera. And so it requires much more than just a very good data scientist team, as important as a great data scientist team is. And the companies that I think do it better than others, I wouldn't want to imply, I think so many companies do it amazingly well that I've seen, but the companies that are further along is because they've created a broader culture in the organization, across the operations teams, the business teams, the interaction of the data science teams with those and others to facilitate those outcomes. It doesn't mean the data science team can ever always get their way, but nevertheless, there's a much more collaborative approach and understanding of what the data scientist team needs to be successful. To the degree that there's just a friction approach and the data scientist team is just expected to figure out how to do it and no one else has to change around them, well, I think you're not going to get a lot done.
I actually, just putting in a slightly prior life at NVIDIA, I ran our AI consulting business. One of the things that I think is key that you mentioned, and I want to really talk about a little bit more, is the iterative nature of data science. And I don't think most data science projects have a binary success or failure. I think the expectation from leadership, and that we need to set as mature project managers for an AI-related or any data science-related project, right? It's a learning system. It's going to learn to get better as we care for it. So version 1, release 1, phase 1, whatever you want to call it, is going to be, okay, the intern showed up. The intern went to college. The intern showed up on day 1. They're eager, they're ready to learn, but they don't know that much. And so we're going to have to care and feed for them. We're going to have to train them. Every week, the nice thing about these AIs, if we do it right, if we have the strong processes, if we iterate, they're not going to forget because they, went out skiing and banged their head against a tree, right? They're going to get better every day. Every bit of education we put into them, we're going to get some benefit out of. But they're going to get better and better over time. They're not going to start out 100%. The other piece that I think goes to some of your labeled data discussions that we haven't talked about is the use of synthetic data. I think we're starting to see a lot more understanding of how we can use AI systems themselves to take an existing data set and expand it, inflate it, create new data, but that data we have labels for. It may not be perfect, but now we can use that to sort of bootstrap our way and really leverage those handful of golden, human-analyzed, gold standard data more effectively. Sorry to have hogged the microphone there for a second.
No, that's fine, yeah. So on your initial question, I think it's, as any change process, you need to invest more before you can be more efficient. So, now they don't have AI, and they need to spend time on top of the actual work to build the AI and make it understand the way they work. So when it's done, then they can get the reward and get the time and automation that they build. But for any business that you transform, they will need to invest themselves to create these things. And nobody else is going to do that. The data scientists can listen to them, we can help them, but they know what they want to be done. So they have to spend the time. And that's quite hard because, of course, everybody would like to have this shiny AI delivered on their desk that works. Doesn't cost me any money, any time. I just plug it, that works, that's perfect. I can take holidays. But it doesn't work like this. So you need to make the effort before you collect the time and money as a reward.
Okay, we are out of time, so drinks are about to start. And before we leave, I just want to ask to the amazing panelists, if you want to leave just one topic, one idea, one sentence, how to use AI to make the banking successful in the future, what would that be?
I would say that there's been too much talk about not enough access to data or not good enough data. Data is a discipline and needs to be treated as such, and you can create a competitive advantage out of it if you know how to do that well. So rather than moan about not having access to it, treat it as something in which you can create competitive advantage around in order to drive that into the ML process.
Thank you.
I think building competence in the whole data science and AI process it's not just going to be a source of competitive advantage. Your competitors will be doing it. It's going to be a survival imperative. Get started, find a way to start, and understand that this is a treadmill because it does get better and better with the care you give it. So you're going to have to get on the treadmill and you're going to have to start running.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. And I say that every week to a different person, maybe. So it's not something that's optional. Like something that will give you competitive advantage. If you don't do that, you're dead. So that's a wave that's coming anyway. So not doing anything is actually pushing you backwards because all the other guys are doing it. I think your example on the bank services that you had was a very nice one. All the chatbots and very tailored customer services, everybody is doing it. If you don't, in 5 years, who's going to bank with Nationwide if they don't offer 24/7 services? No one. So they're dead. The same goes for fraud. Everybody is getting better at fraud and AML, all these things because of AI. The FCA will adapt. So in 5-10 years, the standards of fraud and AML levels they will require will be much, much, much higher because it will be easier to do that because of AI. A bank that doesn't do that, they'll just be dead. So it's, in a way, it's coming. It's not optional. And as you've said, the earlier you start, the better you will be in the future. So don't wait.
Thank you very much, Leon, John, Aymeric. We're going to be outside for questions. If you have any questions, we'll be having drinks. Thank you very much again. See you outside.